What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy the Hater. I'm feeling great. I had a lot of good sleep last night. I feel re-energized. Tomorrow's Thursday, which is my last day of working until Sunday, actually. I'll have to do a little bit of work, but I'm going to take it easy on Sunday so I can, try to enjoy WrestleMania, although we all know that's not up to your boy. I was thinking of Saturday and or Sunday doing like a watch-along where basically the Hater talks during the entire time as you guys try to watch WrestleMania. But I'm not sure if that would work because some people want to actually watch WrestleMania and hear, Michael Cole and other jobbers instead of the Hater, although I think I'm much more entertaining. But anyways, cucks, we're still debating that. But for now, I wanted to do a quick vid up in this bitch about the importance of kayfabe, okay? So, a lot of times, people spurt out the words, kayfabe is dead. Now, they say this as if just because kayfabe is dead, it can't come back again, right? Now, let me understand what these people are trying to say. They're trying to say, because we have now broken kayfabe once, and people are in on the secret that wrestling is fake, that we cannot go back to that mentality. But personally, I think anyone who's not retarded always knew that wrestling was fake. If you watch wrestling, you know immediately that it's fake. Maybe you can fool a child or someone who is retarded or someone like that, but realistically, you ain't fooling real people, and definitely not adults and anyone who's considered smart. They're not going to believe that wrestling's real because you can clearly tell that it's fake. You watch one Sami Zayn match or one Cody Rhodes match and you know it's fake, Furthermore, we have the complete ridiculousness of having people like the Big Show in wrestling. Big Show's like a 2 or 3 time world champion. You know what I mean? Like, he should be like, if wrestling was real, Big Show would have been champion for like 20 years. You know what I mean? Nobody would have been able to beat up the Big Show, right? Anyways, that's not here nor there. The point is, there's 2 kinds of kayfabes. There's that kind of kayfabe, the kayfabe where people really believe it's real, which is absurd. And then there's the other type of kayfabe, where everyone knows it's not real, but everyone else plays along, right? So for example, one of these kids that I knew when I was a kid, he was from the Dominican Republic. Good kid, you know what I mean? One time I was over at his house because we were friends, right? And his mother, he did something like trivial, and his Dominican mother beat the shit out of this kid, man. But it was almost sadistic. I was in the next room over playing Mortal Kombat 2, And like people, when I tell people, they're like, oh, that must have been so traumatic. I was like, nah, I don't think so, man. Personally, I didn't give a flying fuck. And I'm sure he didn't give a shit either. I mean, he was crying like a little bitch. But whatever. Anyways, point is, this kid, he was a big wrestling guy. And back then, I didn't even like wrestling, right? I was like second or third grade or some shit. Third grade, I think. So basically, this Dominican kid, he would tell me that he's like, The Undertaker is really the devil. I think his mother was also stupid as shit because she watched wrestling too, and I think she really believed that shit, But anyways, it is what it is. The point is, some people believed it, but they believed it because The Undertaker, we didn't have the internet, and The Undertaker would act like that shit in real life. So if you saw like a picture of The Undertaker like on TV, because some paparazzi or something, he'd be wearing all black, he'd be playing the character, right? But everyone knew, like everyone who's not retarded, basically, knew, right, that The Undertaker wasn't a demon. I'm sure my friend, who I lost contact with because I moved, right, I'm sure he now understands, or even, a year after that, because he was a smart kid, he probably understood that The Undertaker player is not a demon, right? That's the kind of kayfabe that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the keeping things consistent part of kayfabe, right? I'm not saying that, the next Undertaker has to wear black all the time, but he should try to, right? That's the thing, right? And people like Young Bucks shouldn't go out there and act like there is no kayfabe, Like if you hate someone on screen, you should act in real life like you hate them, right? JBL and Eddie Guerrero were very good friends, but because they were in a feud, one was a face, one was a heel, they would go and sit at different tables when the boys, quote unquote, would go out to drink, right? The idea was that these guys have to live out their gimmick. This is part of the bargain. Now, in my opinion, people should be compensated for that, right? You should be paid more money if your gimmick is I'm the Undertaker versus if your gimmick is I'm the Miz, right? Where you can just play it normally, nobody's gonna question it. You know what I mean? You should be paid for the fact that, you have to wear black for your entire life so people think you're a demon. Now, the importance of kayfabe goes towards the importance of credibility and basically the idea, the notion that wrestling should be taken seriously, right? The mystique behind wrestling is that these guys are like make-believe characters, just like the Hulk and Superman. And the idea is that we should never know if the Undertaker can or cannot fight in real life. Think about it this way. If people like CM Punk, for example, didn't go and get their asses beat at UFC, nobody would know how good or bad WWE wrestlers are in terms of their ability to fight UFC fighters. Nobody would know, because some of them, number one, are capable athletes. Like Dolph Ziggler, as an example, he's like, I think he was like a state champion in wrestling, right? So his wrestling is honestly more elite than most UFC guys, like by a lot, right? The striking in the UFC is like the best striker in the UFC is like a C- striker overall, right? Like Max Holloway or someone like that is like a C- striker in boxing. Like he would never make it in boxing, The UFC never had like an A+ striker. Sean O'Malley is the closest thing. But anyways, the point is, we're not supposed to know these things. Now, if you see like some of these wrestlers as a hobby, they go and do like dumb shit, They go and do things like jiu-jitsu tournaments. So like, or UFC, but you'll have someone like Dean Ambrose, right? Dean Ambrose will go to like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournament, get his ass whipped by a regular dude who's like a dentist or something, and then I'm supposed to believe that Dean Ambrose is a tough guy? A dentist beat your ass, right? You shouldn't be able to expose yourself so that you are not exposed infinitely more in your public job, right? A lot of people ask the hater, hey, do a face reveal. Now, the hater would love nothing more than to do that. I would love to have the videos be me talking and emoting like I'm doing right now in my car, hater on the road, right? But the hater has other obligations, right? If certain people find out that I speak this way, they might make me lose out on specific contracts that I have in my job, right? And other opportunities. You see what I'm saying? If I reveal my hand, which one day I will, I'm sure, but that's when I'll have like either nothing to lose or I'll have made all my money and everything will be solid. We're working towards it, cucks. But that's the idea, right? I can't expose myself one way or another. If I say something stupid here, my job is such where like my intellect matters, right? The perception that I'm intelligent matters a lot in my line of work. So if I am perceived as an idiot, I might lose out on work. You never know, right? That's the same idea that should be pushed forward in actors and wrestling, right? Same thing, motherfuckers. It's no different than it would be for actors, right? For example, if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't want to see like some 5'5" guy beat your ass in a boxing match. Because then I can't believe that you're going to go kill like 55 Cubans or whatever in Commando, I should say. See what I'm saying? Same thing. So when people like Dean Ambrose, people like CM Punk, people with aspirations beyond wrestling, when these people expose the business, I think that the appropriate measure is that they need to leave, right? So for example, The Rock exposes the business by going and being an actor, so he's gone from WWE, right? You can do either WWE or other shit. Nothing else is compatible. If Xavier Woods is gonna go and play like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, ain't no way, motherfucks, that someone who plays Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or someone that plays with action figures is kicking my ass. Now, obviously, I know conceptually that's definitely possible. Like, for example, if Kane decides to start playing with action figures, he'll kick my ass, right? But I'm never gonna believe that shit. You have to be believable. So, for example, comparing The Undertaker always wearing black to Dean Ambrose going and losing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments is an apt comparison. I'll give you an even better example, right? One of the most underrated wrestlers of all time, in my opinion, Mark Henry, who, by the way, had one of the best finishers of all time. One of the most fitting finishers, the World's Strongest Slam. Mark Henry saw that his career was going down the shitter, right? And because Mark Henry is clearly an intelligent man, he understood. He's like, I gotta like boost myself, right? The writers ain't doing it for me. Other people have done this. Jack Swagger, Bobby Lashley. They went and they did other things, and instead of exposing the business, they went and kicked ass. Jack Swagger is undefeated in MMA, I'm pretty sure. Bobby Lashley has a very respectable, like, 15-3 record or something like that. Especially for someone that did it later in life and as a hobby, more or less. He's got a very respectable record. Brock Lesnar became a UFC champion. You know, he exposed the UFC. That's what Vince and company wanted. They want my top guy to expose other top guys. So when Brock Lesnar goes and beats the living shit out of Frank Mir in their second fight, and he goes and he beats the then undefeated Shane Carwin, if he beats both their asses, then that validates the WWE. Because if you look back, it's like, oh shit, Brock Lesnar had more trouble beating up Matt Hardy than he did beating up, fucking Shane Carwin, let's say, right? Now, obviously, the intellectual mind understands. This doesn't mean that Matt Hardy can beat up Shane Carwin. Obviously, we know that. However, the kayfabe mind doesn't understand that. The kayfabe mind suspends disbelief and says, oh shit, you guys are gonna get it. It's the same kayfabe mind that starts chanting things like, Joe's gonna kill you. And it's like, well, it depends on who he's wrestling, motherfuckers. If he's wrestling Booker T, there ain't no way Joe is killing Booker T. If he's wrestling Christopher Daniels, it'd be an even fight. If he's wrestling Taka Michinoku, Joe would win. If he's wrestling Randy Orton, Joe is gonna get his ass whooped in 10 seconds. If he's wrestling The Undertaker player, he's getting destroyed. If he's wrestling Brock Lesnar, he's getting murdered. If he's wrestling Drew McIntyre, you understand my point, right? But the fans will still chant, Joe's gonna kill you. And it's like, he's standing next to Drew McIntyre. Like, are you retarded? Drew McIntyre would eat this guy if he wanted to, right? That's the idea. They'll chant things like, oh, Daniel Bryan's gonna kill you. And it's like, no, he can't. He can't beat up anybody, right? So the kayfabe mind is that mind, and it's a very valuable and important part of wrestling. So back to Mark Henry. Mark Henry, career in the shitter. He's not getting the push that he thought he was gonna get, despite his big-time, 10-year, unprecedented contract. He's now at like FVW, whatever the fuck, OVW, whatever the fuck it was back then, getting developmental training, right? And he understands, he's like, shit, I gotta do something about this. He grows his hair out. That's not gonna be enough, obviously. So he decides to go and compete in the world's strongest man contest, right? Vince McMahon famously says, they have a conversation, and Vince says, Mark, that's great. Do it. But just remember, there is no room in the WWF, or WWE, whatever the fuck it was at that point, for the world's second strongest man. In other words, if you go there and some Georgian or some Latvian or some Icelandic guy murders you and proves that he's stronger than you, then I don't need you, motherfucker. I'm going to try to get that guy because I can no longer market you as the world's strongest man. Now, I understand that marketing someone as the world's strongest man is like a titular marketing technique, but the same thing applies for non-titular ones. For example, you can market, Dean Ambrose and his stable of goofs as these like tough guy sadists, but then you have to fucking live that part, motherfuckers. Like, if there's a dog dying in the street and you're Dean Ambrose, you don't go and save the dog, you go and kick it, right? Now, obviously, you shouldn't abuse animals, but you understand what I'm saying. You have to live up to the character. So Mark Henry goes, and he actually ends up winning the world's strongest man contest, the motherfucker. He actually ends up doing what he's supposed to do. Therefore, he exposes the business, right? He exposes the business of the world's strongest man. Because those guys are arguing as to who's the strongest, but their argument is only valid because other people like Mark Henry are not participating in this. You expose the business, right? That or the sport. It's the same thing. Like, for example, if let's just say that Michael Jordan is the best basketball player of all time. I personally think it's LeBron, but whatever, right? If he's the best basketball player of all time, but let's say you have in football some 7'1" athletic specimen who is more athletic than Michael Jordan. Then you might say, well, if this motherfucker played basketball, he would be dunking on Jordan's ass every 5 seconds, right? The world is lucky that this guy didn't play it. We do this all the time with like fighters, right? You'll see some like exceptional athlete and you'll be like, oh man, thank God that like, I don't know, JJ Watt or even LeBron, let's say, thank God that these guys decided not to do fighting, right? Because ain't no way that if JJ Watt decided to be a pro fighter, that John Jones has any chance against him. You know what I mean? Because there's a point, like, you know how like John Jones always talks about how his brothers like manhandle him because they're football players, right? Like if those brothers decided to do this, it'd be a different story. You know what I mean? So with that being said, right, wrestling, by virtue of it being fake, is the most prone of all sports, quote unquote, to being exposed. As such, kayfabe is what protects wrestling from the exposure, right? Kayfabe is what makes me believe as a child that there's no man alive that would ever beat up Big Show or Kane, right? Because they look the part. Now, Tyson Fury would knock out Kane and Big Show, right? Because he's a big motherfucker, you know? But I didn't know that as a kid. And quite frankly, a lot of people wouldn't know that as adults either. You know what I mean? They wouldn't know how tough and strong someone is or how good they are at whatever they purport to be good at. That is the central issue of wrestling. Because these people, like Dean Ambrose, you know, go out there and get their asses beat by everybody in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're like, all right, I'm not intimidated at all by Dean Ambrose. Like, now he's finally looking a little cut, like he's getting a little jacked. But I never bought into this, like, I'm a tough guy, watch out for me persona. Shut the fuck up. You know what I'm saying? You don't intimidate me at all, cuck. You know? And then next to him, you have Marina Shafir, who, like, her entire career is she's this, like, badass MMA fighter. I'm pretty sure she has a losing record, right? Which in MMA should be like a death sentence. I'm going to Google this bitch right now. Marina Shafir, Moldovan professional wrestler. She's also 37. Holy shit. She's 1-2, motherfucks. She's 1-2 in MMA records, in her MMA bouts. And she fought at she lost in Invicta, right? And then she also lost 2 times at something called LOP, Chaos at the Casino 4 and Chaos at the Casino 5. And she lost like every fight. Like she won 1 fight in 2 minutes, and then she lost her other 2 fights in 37 seconds each. So her entire professional MMA career has lasted 3 minutes and 1 second, if you add everything up. And I'm supposed to believe that because she fought for 3 minutes and did the training required for that, losing twice and winning once, that she's a badass? Like, I'm supposed to believe that, for example, she would have any shot beating up, like, you know, Piper Niven or like Bianca Belair, you know? I mean, maybe she'd beat up Bianca Belair because she's a regular athletic girl, but I wouldn't be shocked if Bianca Belair or Rhea Ripley whooped her ass, right? And that's the problem. Because they expose themselves, you cannot present them as being, like, amazing anymore. Wrestling back in the day, the 2 ways to get into wrestling would be to, like, work your way up, like The Undertaker player, or to be someone exceptional. Like, for example, Kurt Angle, right? For example, Mark Henry, right? Mark Henry doesn't need to go wrestle in the indies. They're going to sign him because he's the world's strongest man. And they're going to go off the idea of, well, I can teach him 5 moves, you know? And they did. They didn't know that they also had one of the coolest people of all time there, but they did. Hall of Famer, well-deserved. Shout out to Mark Henry. Kurt Angle, same thing. Nobody knew that he was going to pick up the wrestling and be as good as he was. But it didn't matter because the idea is he's a legitimate athlete. He's a gold medalist. So, of course, he's a bigger athlete, a better athlete than The Rock. Of course, he's a better athlete than literally everyone there because he's a real athlete, you know? And you can market that. Nowadays, we have fake athletes, and then they go and cry and bitch and moan. Then they play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and play with action figures. And then after that, they go get their asses kicked at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. You know? Unacceptable. If you go, that should be seen as a risk. Like a risk-reward situation. The same thing as it was for Mark Henry. If you are Dean Ambrose, right, and you go to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, thereby risking kayfabe, then what needs to happen is this. If you get your ass beat 3 times out of 3 times, let's say, right, in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, and you're 0-3, then the next week, you need to go out there and Lee Moriarty needs to beat you in 4 minutes. This needs to be adjusted on your presentation. And that's a big problem. This lack of adjustment is a big problem because it exposes everybody else. See what I'm saying? Just like Mark Henry, there's no room for the second. If you're Mark Henry and you lose the world's strongest man competition, then the next thing that should happen to you is basically Bobby Lashley puts you in the hurt lock and you can't escape. And now we've established that Lashley's also stronger than you, right? So that's how wrestling works. That's how burials work, right? Jeff Jarrett doesn't want to lose to China because then he's exposed. See what I'm saying? And that's the thing. There are no more consequences. And I will leave this video by saying one thing. The biggest example of this, by far, is CM Punk. This guy went and got his ass beat by 2 relative nobodies. Mickey Gall at the time was a somebody, but long story short, Mickey Gall hasn't turned into anybody, right? Mickey Gall is nothing interesting. Mickey Gall is basically like an undercard guy, right? with a 50-50 record, because I just Googled his ass. He's a 50-50 record guy who's been getting his ass beat in UFC. Like, basically, he beat CM Punk, he won one more match, and then after that, he just got his ass beat. Like, he's been like 3-6, 3-7, I should say, since then. You know what I mean? Since CM Punk, he's been 4-7. You know? These guys never made it. The other guy was even worse. That guy's done completely. You know? So the point is, as a result of this ass whooping at the hands of otherwise unremarkable people, you know, then CM Punk needs to come back and he needs to be like an undercard guy. And then he can work his way up. You know, you can rehabilitate him. But in what world am I supposed to believe that CM Punk can beat up R-Truth? I know he can't. You know? Because I saw CM Punk fight. Before that, you could make the argument. You're like, I don't know. They're both like, you know, relatively big and muscular guys. Like CM Punk is like, I mean, he's skinny fat, but like he is muscular. He's not like, if you saw him on the street, you'd be like, oh, that guy works out. You would think, right? So you'd be like, oh, that guy might be able to beat my ass. But then when you see him fight, you're like, hey, there's no chance. Like, for example, now, like, if I fought CM Punk, I'm 95% sure I'd beat his ass like thoroughly, right? Because I saw that he can't throw a punch. He doesn't know how to throw a punch, right? So I'd smack him in the face, you know? But that mystique should still be there. And if I think I can beat him, then what the fuck are we talking about with like him beating up Drew McIntyre, a monster among men? You know? There is no scenario in which CM Punk can beat up Drew McIntyre. It's stupid. You know? And that's the problem. Because we've completely ignored that other things happen and that these things should be weighed in on wrestling, it's over, right? That's it. Brock Lesnar, I even thought, honestly, I was like, wow, Brock Lesnar, even though he became a UFC heavyweight champion, proving himself to be elite, like Brock Lesnar should be in the UFC Hall of Fame for all the contributions that he made. But since then, he got his ass beat by Cain Velasquez and a few other people. So now I'm just like, oh, okay, like he ain't that special. You know what I mean? He ain't that special. So like, when John Cena beat him in his return match, I was like, yeah, what's weird about that? Just because you fought in the UFC doesn't mean that you're a good fighter, right? Marina Shafir fought in Invicta. She's not a good fighter. CM Punk fought in the UFC. He's not a good fighter. You have to win. You have to make a name for yourself. And Brock Lesnar was on a downturn. He quit UFC, right? He aged out basically, and he came back to WWE. You know, simple as that, Cucks. Simple as that. So he should be punished for that. He wasn't, and that's kind of where the problem started. Like he went and beat up Undertaker. It's like, how can the guy that can't beat Cain Velasquez beat the Undertaker, right? I'm not talking about real life. If you look at Cain Velasquez and The Undertaker, well, to be fair, it was an old Undertaker. But if you look at Cain Velasquez in his prime and The Undertaker in his prime, there's no one that would think that Cain Velasquez would beat Undertaker just by looking at them, right? You would never think that, you know? Same thing if you put like Cain next to him, you know? As a matter of fact, I think Cain would beat Cain Velasquez. I don't give a fuck. Size, motherfucks. That being said, take care of yourselves and go fuck your mothers, motherfucks.